Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome all of you to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement interview with expert series to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement, and your host for all these calls. So now I want to introduce Helen Dennis. Helen is going to be talking about the recent game changers in aging. And I must say, I think she's a game changer herself. She's a pioneer in the field of aging and is just a wonderful person, to say the least. She's a nationally recognized leader on issues of aging and the new retirement, with academic, corporate, and nonprofit experience. She's received awards for her university teaching at USC Davis School of Gerontology and for her contributions to the field of aging, the community, and literary arts. She's an editor of 2 books, author of over 100 articles, a frequent speaker, and weekly syndicated columnist on successful aging for the Southern California News Group, which reaches about 1.6 million readers. And she's actually published about 950 columns. She's assisted over 20,000 employees to prepare for the non-economic aspects of retirement. She's co-author of the Los Angeles Times bestseller Project Renewment, the first retirement model for career women, and she's been recognized by PBS Next Avenue as one of the 50 influencers. And Helen's a tour de force. We've met over the years at positive psychology conferences, ASA conferences, and probably other conferences. And I consider you, Helen, a colleague and a friend. And Helen also started a program through ASA, kind of keeping the older professionals engaged, and it's now called Legacy Corp. And I'm happy to be part of that organization with her. So anyway, Helen, I'm just so delighted to have you with us. And I know you were with us back in 2015, focusing on then some game changers in aging, and some are the same and some are newer. So what are some of the game changers in aging?
Well, thank you, Dory. I need to tell you, I also consider you a very good colleague and friend, and I'm delighted to be with you on your Revolutionize Retirement program. I want to cover 5 areas. I want to talk a little bit about longevity, the longevity revolution, the backdrop of the pandemic, the new life stage, which is familiar to many who are in the field, who are on the call, the role of technology and community. What is happening is that all 5 of these are converging at once. It feels like a single moment when all of this is happening. So I want to talk about these in terms of what's happening, but also get to the point of what does this mean personally as well as professionally. So let's start with the whole longevity piece. And I'd like to take a very broad approach to longevity and the longevity revolution. So let's start with life expectancy. So we know over the past 100 years, we've gained 30 years of life, and people are living longer. This is considered transformational. I'd like to remind you that in 2019, life expectancy at birth was actually 78.8 years. Today it's 77. So although we're doing well in life expectancy, transformational, gained 30 years, we've actually lost a year this past year. So we have people who are living longer, and we have more of them, more of us who are living longer. So let's look at some numbers. In 2020, it was about 15% of the population was 65 and over. That accounts for about 1 out of 7 people. If you move to 2030, which is what demographers like to look at because that's when the youngest baby boom turns 65. Here we're talking about almost 1 out of 5 people, almost 19, maybe even 20%, will be 65 and over. That translates to well over 70 million people. Now, if any of you have ever been to Florida, you will get an indicator of what an older society looks like. One, okay, there's more gray hair. Okay, there are more early birth specials, but it's more than that. You will see likely more retirement residences, nursing homes, recreational facilities, banks. When you go to the supermarket, you may see smaller portions in the frozen food department. You also may see some slower drivers. So not every city or state is going to look like Florida, but it's going to have a big influence. So there's no question we have people living longer and we have more people who are living longer. So we've talked about life expectancy, okay? But there's another perspective here. We've talked about lifespan. Another way to look at that is in terms of health span. And here the news is not so good. The news is not quite as good. And what do we mean by health span? Well, it means different things to different people. In general, it means being free of a serious disease, and it's considered serious if it's a leading cause of death. So what we know is, on average, up to 20% of our lives are spent unhealthy. That's actually too long of a time. It's really, we've increased life expectancy, but we have not decreased morbidity. And if there's work to be done, it's certainly in this perspective to increase health span. So we can talk about retirement and the retirement years in the future. We need to live longer and healthier to enjoy those retirement years. I wanted to show this slide because it reminds us when diseases hit. This is a list of the top 10 causes of death in the U.S. and the median age, the median average of when these occurrences begin. So heart disease, average age of first occurrence, the median age is 65. Stroke, 65. Lower respiratory infection, 75. Alzheimer's disease, 65. Colorectal cancer, 70. Prostate cancer, 66. So it reminds us of the vulnerability that comes with age when it comes to disease. Okay, so again, we've done very well on life expectancy, not so good on health span. So, but all is not so bad. If we look at this slide, the first arrow is the bad news story, because what we know is that aging is a declining process. Those are the facts. So what is the good news? We know the things we can do to slow the normal aging process down, okay? For example, we know that with age, we lose muscle mass, which means we're not as strong. Our balance may be off, but we know there's something we can do about it. That's strength training, and we know we can get stronger with age. We also know certain things improve with age, certain kinds of intelligence called fluid intelligence, where one can think quickly, one can problem solve better, one has wisdom. So I think, and this is a whole other lecture, we know that aging is a declining process. We know there are things we can slow it down to push this period of frailty. Maybe at 120, we're not going to be as strong as we were at 70, but we can push that frailty out to the outer limits. And I like to quote one of my favorite geriatricians at Stanford, Walter Bortz, and I had chatted with him years ago, and he said the real enemy of aging is not disease. He says the enemy of aging is frailty, and that we can do something about. So taking this longevity conversation just a step further with a slight variation is that we know something about optimal aging. We have information that we can act upon, and here's just one model. This was developed by John Rowe and Robert Kahn actually in the 90s, late 90s, and it still holds. So most of the research in aging looks at the declining aspect. Why do we lose cells? Why do we lose functioning? Rowe and Kahn came along and said, let's ask a different question. So what do we know about people who really do this well? So they followed about 1,000 successful agers over about 8 years, combined the research of about 16 scientists, and came up with this model. These are the three characteristics they had in common. One, they avoided disease and disability, and by that they meant they avoided the risk factors of being overweight, lack of exercise, poor nutrition, stress, etc. So they avoided risk factors. The second thing they observed is they operated at a very high level in terms of cognitive and physical functioning. That means they were intellectually engaged, physically active. And the third component is they were engaged with life. And by that, the researchers meant they engaged in reciprocal relationships with a give and a take, and they were involved with productive or meaningful activities, which means you could be caring for an aging parent or mate and have a reciprocal relationship and having a meaningful one, or it could be work or volunteering, or it could be just taking care of a family. So this is a model, if you will, of optimal or successful aging, but it all relates to part of what we call the longevity revolution. So let's look at section 2, the second game changer. So everything that we're doing right now has been with the backdrop of the pandemic. And let's say both personally and professionally, hopefully, we have all survived and survived well. So what does surviving mean? It means that we continue to live or even exist, especially in spite of danger or hardships. And clearly this has been a dangerous time that has been filled with hardship. But we have to move on. So what does it mean to move from surviving to thriving? And again, think of this personally as well as professionally. What does that mean? It means to get better at something, okay, to improve. Or it means just being good at something. It also means to develop and to grow. To thrive is to be fortunate. And certainly thrive means that we feel good about ourselves and about life in general.
Actually, there was a study that came out that Ken Dykewald did with Jones Financial Services that really was talking about older people thriving better during the pandemic than younger people because we've had so many experiences with the ups and downs of life so that somehow we're able to weather it a little bit better. I just sort of wanted to add that little piece to it.
And I'm glad you did because I will also include that and highlight it. So when we look, this has had tremendous impact on older adults. We know that 8 out of the 10 deaths have been among people 65 and over, and about almost 180,000 people died in nursing homes, which is just a tragedy. So the deaths have been certainly disparate. But very interesting, there are some who say that the pandemic has enforced stereotypes, which is a whole different take on this, in that now older adults will be perceived as pathetic, as vulnerable, as weak, as needy. I happen to disagree with that, but that was one perspective, that the image, if you will, the image of aging can be influenced just by the tragedies that have surrounded older adults. And there's another impact. I think this is on older as well as younger adults, but older more so because of vulnerability and fear. I call it an existential fear of getting sick, the fear of going out of your house, the fear of walking past someone who doesn't have a mask, and now the fear of going into the environment even though you're vaccinated, but you're still fearful to take off your mask. So I want to suggest we are on the verge of a cautious coming out party. Okay,
that's a good way to put it.
It's a cautious coming out party, and to really again highlight what Dori has said. It is quite remarkable that our sense would be that our older adults would suffer more in terms of emotionally, but clearly because of their years of experience, their wisdom, the fact they've gone through hard times before, their coping mechanism was even better. Younger people also are challenged with different things. They have kids at home. They have 2 people working. They're worried about the mortgage. They do have different influences and stressors. And they haven't, for many younger people, this may be the first really stressful, horrible thing they've gone through. Older adults have been through it a lot of times. So let me go back to the point. We're out of jail. Okay, we're out. I mean, oh my goodness, I can go outside and breathe and not worry. I mean, it's almost like a monopoly, get out of jail free. But I have to add, some people are feeling pretty overwhelmed. Let me hold on a second. We can hold this slide for a moment. I want to add that although older people may be coping well, for some, there has been an overwhelm in conversations with a couple of Renewment groups. Woman said, I went out and I just felt anxious. I did 3 things that day. I couldn't sleep that night. I went into my office building And I just felt overwhelmed and confused. And I want to share with you what I did on my day 15, which is atypical of a Helen day. I went to Lens Crafters, and I finally got my glasses changed. Then I did something I've never done before. I went to the bird store. I've never been to a bird store. I decided I wanted to have a bird feeder that was squirrel-proof. I haven't even thought about that. So I went to the bird store, which is a whole story in itself. And then I went to Ralph's Supermarket, leisurely walking up and down the aisles as though I had been at Fifth Avenue. I mean, it was an atypical, I have to say, it was an atypical day. So my only point is it's this new freedom that we have to adjust to. But it also is an opportunity time to look at what do we want to get rid of, not do anymore, and what do we want to keep. And many of the comments I heard were, I don't want to run around as much. I don't want to be quite as busy. I want to focus on my friends. I want to be more focused on specific aspects of my career. I want to focus on specific volunteer commitments, and I don't want to be on 7 boards. So it's also an interesting time to take stock, what to keep and certainly what to toss. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide.
Well, I just want to add, I want to add just a little bit there too, that I'm hearing similar things from coaching clients and therapy clients as well as friends and family actually about the reentry, that it isn't so easy. And I think part of, it's not necessarily so easy for everybody because there's a cautiousness and like how free can we be? And the other thing that I've heard, I just wondered if you could comment a little, is, some people older, I hear it from my husband as well as other people, in their 80s, where there's just this sense of I've lost a year of my life and sort of needing to really take stock and say what's reasonable to expect now, like in terms of travel or, because, that, venturing out in the neighborhood is different from people who really were looking forward to traveling, and how that might need to be modified because, it's just it's a global pandemic, which is still very much at work. And so just wanted to,
thank you, Dori. They're really important points. There's no question. And I've also heard a little bit more discussion on end of life, a little bit that mortality may be a little closer than what I thought. But it has given time for people to think and to reflect. And if we say, is there any upside to this cataclysmic situation, it is people are a little bit more thoughtful and reflectful and hopefully better decisions. My hope is that we come out better at the end of this in terms of our decision making. And I just would say hopefully society as a whole, but we have to be aspirational. Okay, so let's move on to a common term we've heard before, many of us. It's called the new life stage. This is the ongoing game changer. Mary Catherine Bateson is a cultural anthropologist and also the daughter of Margaret Mead. And she certainly acknowledges that we've ended years toward the latter part of life. But I think she said it well. She said we have added 20 years, not actually to the end of life, but to the middle of life. And that's a new time. It's new opportunities, new aspirations, new possibilities. But this is so new that your gerontologist, your psychologist, your anthropologist, your sociologist can't decide what we should call it. So here are a few examples. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who is a Harvard sociologist, calls it the third age. Eric Erickson called it generativity. Mark Friedman, head of Encore.org, who many of us know, calls it the Encore years. Laura Carstensen, who heads up the Stanford Longevity Center, calls it Act 4. Colleagues at Boston College have referred to it as X-Revolution. It's so new we can't even give it a name. And Ken Dykewald coined the term midolescence, kind of an advanced, accelerated adolescence, where you actually don't know quite where you fit, where you belong, a lot of uncertainties. Abigail Trafford, who used to work for the Washington Post, called it the bonus years. And a colleague and I made up a word. We called it renewment, which is a cross between retirement and renewal. So part of this new life stage means that we've had lots of organizations and movements move into this space. One, we almost all of us are acquainted with, the whole concept of encore careers that was initiated and accelerated by encore.org, frequently referred to as second acts for the greater good, that encompass 4 characteristics. First of all, it occurs after your primary career or even after your second career, and it embraces a sense of purpose, having a sense of passion about what you're doing, sometimes a paycheck, but not always. But the most important part is giving back, making a difference, giving back to society. Now, for about 10 years, encore.org offered something called a purpose prize. This was given to an individual 60 years and older who approached some of society's more complex problems, came up with a solution, and demonstrated impact. This is one of my favorite stories. This is about Catalina Tapia. So Catalina Tapia comes from Mexico with about $6 in his pocket. He's 19, 20 years old. He moves to San Francisco, and he starts a gardening business. He manages to send his son to Boalt Law School at Cal Berkeley, and during the graduation ceremony, he thinks, why can't other low-income Latino families provide a good education for their kids? So he goes to his gardeners. He said, I want you to contribute. Go to your clients, have them contribute. And he starts the Bay Area Gardeners Foundation. In 2 years, he raises $250,000. He funds 17 students with scholarships who, in turn, do community service. Catalina Tapia won $100,000. Why those recognitions were so important is that it highlighted the contributions of older adults. We know that older people have always volunteered, but this was Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Next Avenue highlights. And what's so important to us in the field, and also who aren't, is how we message aging. And I think what this Purpose Prize did was to highlight and give kudos, rewards, and recognition to people who are doing it. Dory, did you want to say something on this?
No, I've been so impressed. I'm impressed with that story, and I'm so impressed with the creativity and entrepreneurship of the people who've won the Purpose Prizes over the years. It really is just so inspiring.
It is, and I think, Dory, that was one of the purposes. One, to put this on the awareness level, to admire, affirm the value. I mean, it goes to the value of older people in our society. And unfortunately, aging continues to be a hard sell. We just have to work harder at it to get the messages across. But yes, these winners have been inspiring, and now AARP has taken over the Purpose Prize. So again, within this space, we have a lot of activity. We have the Encore Network, which is now 10 years old. The Encore Network has a vision as a global culture where older adults are vital contributors to more engaged and equitable societies. Again, valuing older adults, their impact, and the fact they can make the difference. The Encore Network is really transforming the Encore life stage. The network now has 124 members in 32 states, 11 countries, and they provide all kinds of important educational and even advocacy activities, webinars, affinity groups. We have one particular affinity group I know that is led or co-led by Doug Dixon on employment. So it is a very vital and growing organization. So again, within this space, we have Gen to Gen, which many of you know about, a very ambitious, very successful initiative and program. Its mission is to mobilize 1 million adults over 50 to stand up for and with young people today, and they too offer a Gen-to-Gen Encore Prize. Again, they have many activities. This is just a snapshot. They have programs on intergenerational activism, reasons to recruit more staff and volunteer people over 50, making the case for intergenerational childcare and more. Again, impactful. And here really the emphasis is the importance of generation connection, mutual exchange, mutual growth, again, spearheaded and launched by Mark Friedman.
I just want to add in relation to that all of these programs really help confront ageism, because there's the ageism in our society as well as the internalized ageism where people don't kind of think they have much to offer. And so these programs let people, get involved at whatever, place they can, plus inspiration of the people who've created the programs. In addition to Jen, I know there's this movement for recognizing the importance of grandparents, and not everybody is lucky enough to have grandparents who are alive. So there's like foster grandparent or, trying to encourage people to, if they really want that intergenerational connection, but don't have grandchildren of their own, that they can adopt a grandchild in the neighborhood or through a program. And there's just so many ways to feel good and feel connected and be role models, that we're not over the hill.
Yeah, no question, Dory. So capitalizing on the discussion, the importance between generations, I want to highlight a particular program, two people. I did this for a variety of reasons. I want to talk about two individuals, Dana Griffin and Jules Oleon. So, and then I'll tell you, and they launched something called Eldera. I'll tell you about that in a moment. So Dana is a very interesting woman, a young woman who was raised in Transylvania, raised by her grandparents, and she's a former data and advertising executive who's turned an age tech entrepreneur and also specializing in AI, artificial intelligence. She is named by Ad Age one of the 40 under 40 changing the advertising industry. She has had several patents and trademarks and is a young entrepreneur in the aging space. Jules Oleon, and she's in New York. Jules Oleon is in Grenoble, France. He's a tech leader specialized in humanizing technology, again, focusing on AI. He's worked with Oracle, Yelp, Ring.com, and a number of others. These two people have very successful careers, young, entrepreneurial, creative, effective. They were not so happy with their careers, although they were very, very successful at a very young age. They somehow found each other, one in New York, one in France, and they realized what was important to them was humanizing technology and focusing on the relationships between older adults and children and making that connection. So they, a year ago, created Eldera to bring generations together to make the world a better place. They're a global village where generations come to connect, learn, have fun, share wisdom, and create a better future for all. They are building a virtual village with a real soul. So what is interesting from a marketing perspective, they are marketing wisdom. They are marketing joy. They are marketing a soul, which is not the language we usually use when we talk about aging and trying to promote aging. So they have established a platform to connect and match adults 60 and over with children. They have been, let's say, in business, if you will, for about a year, neither take a salary. They have 2,000 matches already in 22 countries, okay? And they look at older adults as contributing their wisdom, their stories, and the kids are learning how to have a conversation, how to listen, how to collaborate. They are enhancing their empathy skills, and they're giving their parents a break that the children are connecting to a wonderful older adult without their parents. But what's intriguing here is that Eldera has created a platform, a very sophisticated platform on matching. And Dory mentioned the American Society on Aging and the Legacy Corps. Mm-hmm. What the Legacy Corps has created, and I'm also part of that, is something called the Legacy Exchange. And we will be white labeling and adopting their platform to connect long-term, effective, professional people in the field of aging with those who are younger and just creating their profession. So we will have what is called a legacy exchange based on Eldera's platform. This is just in the early phases of development, but we are quite excited. It's a different approach, and I mentioned Jules and Dana because I think we're living in a time where innovation in the field of aging can come outside the aging community, and that we who are in the aging community can begin to look broader outside, let's say, our disciplinary lines, to look at where are those partnerships that are external that will be even more creative. And I think the Eldera model is really an interesting one and one to watch. I mean, they've been at it now a year in March, and they're moving. They're moving well and moving effectively. Dori, did you want to mention anything on Eldera? Or?
Yeah, when I heard the presentation, I echo your excitement. It's just, the platform that they have for the kids, it was just wonderful to watch the interactions. There was a little video they had. And then the legacy exchange, I really like that. I think it's a wonderful idea because, those of us that have been at it for a long time really have a lot to offer some of the newer people coming along, entering the field of gerontology or aging or coaching, whatever, in whatever way that they're interacting with people. And it's just a beautiful way to harness the wisdom of older people and make it be intergenerational, not just kids, but, the younger generation professionals starting out.
And I think an important concept here is that there is reciprocity.
Right.
Yeah, that mentoring isn't only a one-way street. There's mutuality. And for that reason, it's an exchange because we, who've been in this a number of years, can learn a lot from the younger folks. So to keep that openness, to know that it is mentoring per se, but there's mutuality. There's mutual learning in the process. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And we're looking at the fourth component, and that's technology. So in the aging space, technology is a major player. It is considered a $20 and now even a $30 billion industry in terms of games and fitness and web cameras and smartphones and telehealth and caregiving and fall detection, fall prevention. So this is a growing and a very exciting field. So I want to just share with you a few, I would say, technical tech innovations which are supportive of older adults who may have some needs. So one is called a liftware spoon. So a liftware spoon is for people who have a tremor, either from Parkinson's or essential tremor. The gadget on the edge of the spoon automatically stabilizes the spoon from shaking, from moving. So now let's think about this. Someone has a tremor, would like to go out to lunch with a friend, and may decide not to because of being embarrassed. So what this allows a person to do, one, it promotes greater function, helps a person retain dignity, independence, and perhaps even becoming more socialized. It comes now in a set. It's pretty well priced. It's made by Liftware, and this is a Liftware spoon. Another innovation is something called TrueLink, and this is for individuals who have mild cognitive impairment. So TrueLink is a customized debit card. It's used wherever Visa is accepted, and what it does, it can limit ATM withdrawals. It can block specific merchants' cost, and it really protects these individuals from fraud and being taken advantage of. And again, what does this do? Enhances independence, empowers a person to go into the marketplace, feel normal, make purchases. Again, enhancing dignity, enhancing functionality, enhancing self-confidence. Next. So here is one called Tombot. It is a robotic, emotional, supportive animal. This dog's name is Jenny, and it is created by a man named Tom Stevens, who has spent decades at high levels in the tech industry. So much of technology emerges from people's personal experience, and this is one example. So Stevens' mother suffered from Alzheimer's disease, and she could no longer care for her closest best friend, her dog. So Tom goes to Jim Henson, who you may remember was inventor and created the Muppets, and created Jenny. So why is Jenny so unusual? Well, first of all, it's robotic. It has sensors so that when you touch the dog, it responds. It is voice activated. You can name your dog, and then the dog will respond to the name. It barks on command. It makes puppy sounds based on recordings from 12-year-old puppies. And I'll tell you the personal experience. I met Tom at a tech exhibit, and I went over to the dog and I put my hand under the dog's face. The dog snuggled into my hand. And I don't know if you ever looked at a dog in the eyes and somehow you can make contact with a dog. You feel. Yeah. I looked into the eyes of this dog, and I swear I made contact with this dog. It's really quite an advancement. It is pretty well priced compared to some of the animals that have been developed in Japan. And so it is used in nursing homes. It is used in people's homes who are suffering from some form of dementia, and it calms them, makes them feel better. I have to tell you, I just put my hand on the dog and I felt better. So this is where technology has really met a tremendous need. And again, outside the aging circle, and that's the story of Tom Stevens and the robotic dog Jenny. Some of you may be aware of the GoGo Grandparent service. This is an on-demand transportation service. It's for people who do not have a smartphone. They may only have a flip-top phone. So you call a number, an operator answers, you get connected to Uber or Lyft, and the person that picks you up usually has a little larger car, usually 4-door. The vehicle can accommodate walkers and wheelchairs. And usually the driver, takes a little bit more time, is not as rushed. It costs a little bit more than Uber or than Lyft. Very likely may greet you at the door, but one thing that is important, you have to be able to transfer yourself from the sidewalk to the car. So GoGo Grandparent also has expanded its services to help with delivery of meals, medication, groceries, etc. So I need to tell you, I think we have time for my backstory on GoGo Grandparent.
Yeah.
Here's a backstory. So this is invented by a man named Justin, and I can't remember his last name. I met him again at an expo. So Justin had a business partner, David, and they launched some business in Silicon Valley, and it didn't do very well. So Justin had to move in with Grandma Betty, essentially for financial reasons. Now, it happens Grandma Betty lives in the town next to me, okay? So Grandma Betty is local. So Grandma Betty hears Justin on his phone calling Uber or Lyft for transportation, and Grandma Betty says, and of course, he's not calling, he's texting, and Grandma Betty says, Justin, can I have the phone number? Well, there is no phone number, and Justin gives Grandma Betty his cell phone number. Well, Grandma Betty's thrilled. She makes the call. She has to go to Coco's restaurant here in Redondo Beach, and she's so excited. She has found this new phone number. You just call it, and, you get a ride. She tells all of her friends. Now, all of her friends are calling Justin's cell phone at all hours of the day and night. And Justin says, I think there's a business here. P.S. He launches GoGo Grandparent in every state of the country and in Canada. So that is my backstory with Justin and Grandma Betty. Okay.
That's a great story. Thank you.
I mean, Grandma Betty, we all are best friend now. I don't know if I think she probably still has a flip-top phone, but that's okay. Okay, let's go to the fifth game changer, and that is community. If there was ever a time for community to be important, it's during this pandemic. I think it's been a lifesaver for people who are not in the field of aging, people in general, but also people in the profession in some way that we can stay connected and feel connected to our work. So let's talk about the village. Again, this is maybe review for many of you who are either part of a village, have started a village, but the village is a national movement of about 300. There are about 300 in the country. It's a nonprofit membership organization. It started in 1999 in Beacon Hill. The village has two purposes. One is to help people age in place for as long as possible. One. The second is of equal importance to help them stay connected to their community. Now, people who belong to a village pay a fee They do pay a fee. And they also have two roles. One is they can receive services, and I'll get to the services in a moment, or they can be volunteers and contribute services. People say, well, is this a construction site? Is this a condominium? Is this someplace in Florida? Well, there happens to be a village in Florida. It has nothing to do with this. But it isn't a place to live, but it is actually a way to live. So I talked about services. What kind of services are involved? Well, let's say on the recipient side, it could be having someone come to your house who is a village member to fix a garden hose, something as simple as that. Or it could be, particularly in Southern California, it could be driving to a bridge game, driving to the doctors, driving to your fitness center. It could be as simple as changing a light bulb. And I want to stop here for a moment. I said simple. Pasadena has I should add that California has about 60 villages. So the village in Pasadena actually developed a wonderful video. And it showed, I think it was a retired engineer coming to someone's home, and the woman was in her probably 90s, to do something as simple as changing a light bulb. She didn't want to get on a stepladder. So he comes in, he greets her, they're friendly, he changes the light bulb, he leaves, he's at the door, and the woman starts crying, tears down her face. He's stunned. This seemed like such a simple act. But if you are in your kitchen and you can't see and it's dark and there's no one there to turn on the light to fix it, you are enormously grateful for this random act of kindness, if you will. So there's great appreciation on the recipient side, but on the volunteer side, for 15 minutes out of his day, he made a difference in someone's life. So simple tasks are so appreciated. There are well visits. People who just need a little company. It's not a nursing service. There's no medication. There's no transferring people, but it's keeping people company. It's being supportive. Next, staying connected is equally as important as the giving and receiving of services. So there are educational programs, hiking groups, birthday celebrations. I'm on the board of my village in Palos Verdes. We have a vodka tasting group, which is very hilarious. We have a group that tells jokes and stories. We have a debating group, a book club, a dine-around. And there's a saying, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village, because it depends on the needs, the desires, the aspirations, the culture, if you will, of that particular community. So I've been asked, well, how big is the village? The village is geographically, it's as far as any volunteer wants to drive. And so it really does not have specific geographic borders, but it's usually in one area of a community. I want to add, I happen to be a cheerleader for the village because it's so natural. I sometimes feel it's like going back to the 50s, where you knew who needed what. If Mrs. Jones didn't feel well, you may have brought over, some matzo ball soup or rigatoni. People cared about they knew about each other. They cared about each other. We have to construct that same caring village today, and the village movement is doing it. So there is one village I want to draw your attention to, which, it's a different slide. Our villages do have a sense of humor. I can't say I'm entirely pleased with my hip replacement, and here is, I guess, a donkey with a striped zebra leg, but, they do have a sense of humor. Don't take themselves too seriously. Next. I want to draw attention to this High Village, LA. This is the first faith-based village in the country. There are two synagogues, Temple Emmanuel, Temple Isaiah, that formed a partnership. The only prerequisite is that you have to belong to one or other of the synagogues. When you think about this, whether it is a church or synagogue or other faith-based institution, that is already an established community. So what the village does is establish a community within a community. So it's a natural. It gives another function to that faith-based institution. And I think because we find religious participation or religious membership has declined in all faiths over the years, this gives faith-based institutions another function, particularly focused on their older members. So again, High Village LA is really a pioneer in looking at faith-based institutions as a base for villages. So So the village is a really important community. I want to mention now one other community that is not as grand, on a much smaller scale, something that I and my colleague Bernice Brad are very involved with. It's called Renewment. Again, it's something Renewment we started about in 1999. And Renewment is designed for career women who are planning their next chapter of life to be equally, if not more satisfying than their previous years of employment. To the right, we have some of our original members from 1990. So where to begin and keeping it short on Renewment. So Renewment is really a forum of women for discussion, structured discussion. This has grown virally. We have about 35 to 40 Renewment entities throughout the country. Some have been meeting for 2 years, some for 5 years, some for 20 years. So you can say the picture on your left is a woman asking, so who am I without my business card? So, we've asked the question. We've grown virally from 1999 to 2021. So why? And because there's no marketing. It's a viral entity. We continue to grow. Why? We have more career women retiring now than ever before. It's a relatively new phenomenon. We're also the first generation to live before and after the women's movement. Most of us had roles, traditional roles of wives, head of the PTA, mothers, community involvement. But we know many went back to school, created a career later in life. So we know what it is to live before and after. The other is we're the first and largest generation of women to define ourselves by our work, and other people define us by our work. But I think most importantly, we've not had role models. We've not had role models how to do this well. Maybe Mary Kay. I don't really identify with Mary Kay. Madeleine Albright. I'd love to identify with Madeleine Albright, but she's at a very different level. So we don't have a lot of role models. So what is the community piece here? We have built inadvertently enduring communities of women over many years, and they have been sustained. So you can say, well, what are the kinds of things that you talk about? Early on, we talked about, well, what does productivity mean at this life stage? And we asked the question, well, what if he retires first? What does that mean? Roles, relationships, expectations. And now what does wisdom mean at this life stage? These are the kind of topics that we talked about early on. But something interesting happened, at kind of a surprise. The surprise is after 20 years, and actually I have to tell you, this struck me. I gave a presentation in Toronto at International Conference, and sometimes having a presentation makes you think about what you're doing a little more deeply. And what became clear is that what we inadvertently have developed was a platform to support career women through transition and change throughout a lifetime. Because the conversations changed. Work to retirement was productivity, identity. Moving into the mid-60s, late 60s, let's say, that was probably during the early 60s, late 60s. Early 70s conversations were for practical caregiving, relocation, financial security. Moving to the mid-70s, late 70s, conversations became more existential. What has been my purpose in life? And moving to the 80s, conversations seemed to focus on health. But it seemed that there was no graduation, that transition and change is part of life. And so what we inadvertently have done is built a platform to support women and inadvertently have created small communities of women. I'm going to add one last piece on this community. We lost a fabulous woman to brain cancer, and she had a lot of friends. And during her later years, during the visit, she said something I won't forget. She said, Helen, I have a lot of friends, but you know who I want around me right now? I want my Renewment women. I will never forget that. The intention is not to make a new best friend. It's to learn and grow for one another. But by having a like-minded value system, deep connections have been formed. Mm-hmm. So quickly, what about the men? Well, the men have formed something called the Life Transition Group. These are two men at each side on the slide, ad executives riding their bicycle along the Redondo Beach bike path saying, oh my goodness, we love our work. What are we going to do? And they formed a life transition group. Next, they're about 25 men, mostly businessmen, successful, who talk about the next chapter in life, far more organized, far more structured than Renewment women. And this is just a photo of when 8 of their men and 8 of our women get together every year around a 16-seat conference table, and we talk about a topic which is fascinating, getting a male-female perspective. And the last piece I want to mention is, and I'm looking at our time, because going back to Renewment, because women weren't meeting face-to-face, we decided to launch something called virtual roundtables, Renewment roundtables. And again, this has grown virally. We started with just an announcement. We got a roundtable, come for discussion on transition and change. We have 15 seats. Waiting list after group 1, waiting list after group 2, waiting list after. We have now 9 groups of women that meet monthly for an hour, a structured conversation about topics of interest. And I would say if any of you are interested in joining our virtual roundtable, my email will be on some list, I think, Dory, and we would be happy to have you join us. So last slide. And I think we can stay on a few minutes for questions if you like, right. Is that my point is all of this is happening at once, okay? And to me, there are messages in all of it. I think in terms of longevity and health span, we need to be role models in terms of health span, and I think we have to promote healthy aging, which means we need to be informed, and we need to do Aging 101 to empower people to slow the aging process. I think in the pandemic, we're adjusting to the new normal. We need to be patient with ourselves and our clients and colleagues. The new life stage, I think we need to support those models that are out there, Gen to Gen, Encore, and the many others, and be open to new models. Technology, the challenge is to keep up, to be tech savvy, and to the community, I think we have to continue to make it happen. We know social isolation is an epidemic in our country, and I think we need to be leaders, joiners, and supporters of creating enduring communities for older adults as well as all generations. I am an optimist, and I believe, the last slide, that all of us have the capacity, the skill, the creativity. Next slide, and last one, to make all of that happen. Oh, my last one, I forgot. The elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is what we're all beginning to talk about. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we, in our professional organizations, in our workplace, in our leisure pursuit activities, how do we embrace diversity, equity, inclusion? What does it mean? How do we interpret it? How do we implement it? How do we support it? That's the elephant in the room. I have no answers, but it's a backdrop. If you want to say the pandemic's an backdrop, diversity, equity, inclusion is a backdrop. And for the very last slide, and then I'm done, is I'm an optimist. I believe the philosophy of Charles Schulz, who says, life is a 10-speed bicycle. Most of us have gears we never use, and I believe individually and collectively we have the creativity, the skills, the talent, the intention to create a better, healthier, meaningful life for ourselves and older adults, which I think will have implications for a better society. I'm signing off. I have said enough. Enough.
Helen, you are a tour de force. No, but go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think and I think it's a question you asked early on, is how do we become influencers? And, if anyone has ever watched Ken Dipel present, he's an absolute master. And he said something really interesting. I had a chance to interview him at the ASA conference. He took sales lessons. I don't know if it was from an insurance guy. He says, I wasn't interested in insurance, but I took classes and lessons on selling, on how to sell ideas. And I think for us in the field of aging in particular, to be even more impactful, we know how, I think we have to upgrade our skills in sales because it's how we tell the story. That's one. But the other, okay, I'll stop there. Let me stop there and ask the questions.
Okay, one person has asked, in Eldera, how do they define children? Is it under 16? Is it younger?
Yeah, I think it's 5 to some teenage year. I forget. Maybe it's 5 to 13 or 14, but it's younger. It's younger children.
And somebody asked if you could say the names again of the people who founded Eldera. Actually, that'll be on the slide, I think.
It's
right?
on the slide. Dana Griffin and Jules Oleon, O-L-E-O-N. And he is in Grenoble, France.
And Meg from Cambridge wanted to mention about Elders Action Network.
I am so sorry. That was on my list, and I did not include it.
And Saging International.
Yes, many. Okay. Keep going. There are many really important ones.
Many, right. And Barbara from Verona says, a silver lining to the pandemic is this truly unique opportunity to discern what to keep and what to toss. And she said, just well said, love the illustration. So I think there are more comments than questions. Another comment was older people during the pandemic also have had the benefit of the social safety net of Social Security and Medicare, right. And that's been really, really helpful. People, other people have lost jobs, furloughed, maybe lost insurance, have to have more expensive COBRA. So the safety net was there. So there are more comments than questions. You are a tour de force, and I mean, it's so interesting but it's interesting to think about how things have changed even since 2015 in terms of sort of the transformations that are happening. And, I love the idea of this robotic dog and I mean, and the spoons and I do agree the villages. It's just connection, engagement, purpose and meaning, community, meaningful relationship. I know years ago now, and we met for a number of years. I was part of a Renewment group, which was wonderful. And now, some people, I guess, are still in the Renewment group, and I'm now part of, through Saging, a wisdom circle, which is men and women, but also dealing with aging. There are just so many different ways of dealing with it. But you are so ahead of the times of having a forum, a platform for women, since women really were part of the labor force now and hadn't been way back as much at least, way back in the 50s and 60s before all the changes of the 70s.
Yeah, I think it's just, we still have a lot more work to do. I think we've come a long way, but ageism is still there. And, observation, data is not going to change ageism. We've had data for a long time, particularly about older consumers who has the money. Didn't really change advertising, didn't change marketing. Now, slowly, it's changing very slowly in terms of entertainment. We know older adults like to watch movies for the longest time. There weren't movies that are designed for people who are mature, but now AARP is supporting that. What I'm saying, it's taken us a long time. I think part of our challenge is to provide experiences for older and younger people to share, and it's one way to get rid of ageism. There's something about having an experience which influences our attitudes, and that is really more powerful than all the data. The numbers don't convince people, maybe their actions a bit, but we need to create those experiences. So there's a lot more work to do. I think we've come a long way. And picking up on Meg's comment, there are many organizations that we need to support who are carrying the torch for a better age and a better older age, a better society. And I think part of the challenge is, where do you place yourself now? There's so many places where we can place ourselves, particularly people in the field of aging, in terms of our professional volunteer commitments. And has this pandemic helped us focus more? Are we more intentional? Are we clearer on the priorities, both personally as well as professionally? So I think I've probably spoken enough.
And just a couple questions that maybe you can answer just in terms of the village model. There have been a couple of questions about, is there a coordinator? How do they function?
Okay. Quick in a sentence. First of all, there's something called the Village to Village Network. Go online and you can see if there's a village in your geographic area. Typically, most villages do have an executive director who's paid. Some do not. Particularly, usually, and in my village, many of them have an executive director and have a board. It's a 501c3, and it operates as a nonprofit.
Great. And also, do you know if are there renewment groups in Canada? I have a question from somebody in Toronto
No, but I would say we can help you start one and join us on our virtual roundtable.
Great. And Jan, who was listening, whose mantra is meaningful work, paid or unpaid through one's last breath. She's one of my role models, and including you. But she says, why not think about, or are you thinking about putting what you presented today, Helen, into a book? Because it's so fun. And I agree, I was thinking the same thing. So are you thinking about that at all?
So I have to tell you that, as you know, we wrote the Renewment book, which we were, to our shock and amazement, was on the LA Times bestseller list. There is a book in the virtual roundtables. I mean, the last topic was the impact of the women's movement on your life and on your professional and personal life. The topics the conversations have been so rich, and we are taking notes on all the conversations. There's probably, if you want to say, how are career, confident, effective women coping with one of the most disruptive events in their entire life? I mean, that even is one question. So the thought of a book at the moment is overwhelming. Anyone who's been there, and Dory, you've done it, and many on this call have done it. It's like it never leaves your mind until you're done. It's like a border in your head. It just never goes away, regardless of what you do. So it's whether you want to have a new partner in your mind and in your soul.
Right.
So I don't know. Let's do a wait and see. But Jan, I thank you for your comment, and I have to go back to Jan. Jan's comment about having meaningful work until the last breath of life is so profound, because we never think about that towards the very end of life. And Jan, I absolutely love and often quote you on that statement, because it shakes us up in thinking about old age and what it is and what it can be.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
Also, Dory, I have to say your format is wonderful, because you have interjected conversation, which is much more interesting than a straight presentation. It really adds dimension and life and interest. So thank you. That's great.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I do want to add one last question, because you didn't comment on this. Cynthia from Boston says, where does intergenerational housing come into the thinking of aging in place discussion, or does it?
I think the co-housing embraces that. Those are, intentional communities and their families, young, middle, old age. So I think co-housing embraces that.
I agree with you. I think it does. Helen, this has just been so wonderful. I think you had given some final takeaways, and then I asked some more questions because they had come in to me, because in part since I wasn't able to see the questions myself. Any other last kind of takeaways you want to just mention before we say goodbye to you?
I think we've come a long way. I think we have a ways to go. And I would say we need to be optimistic. And we need to be aspirational. And we do not have to settle for a status quo. And I think if we could perceive ourselves, each of us, as game changers, because all of us have the potential, and to go forward with that, and I think we all have the capacity to do so. And I just would do the Nike thing. Let's just go do it.
Let's go do it. It's a great way to end. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wealth of wisdom. I mean, it really just was an incredibly full, rich presentation, and there was a number of comments from people just thanking you so much. There's comments from somebody who's a new retirement coach who said, "Oh my gosh, I just learned so much," and other people, just feeling like the wisdom that you have. You're such a pioneer and a role model for all of us. So stay well and safe, and thank you.
My pleasure. And again, if someone is interested in joining our virtual or exploring the virtual roundtables, I think if you have my on the last slide.
Do you want to give it?
Oh, so I'm at Helen Dennis, HELENDENN @gmail.com. If you want more information, just let me know.
Great.
Okay, everyone, take care, stay well, go forward.
Stay well and safe. Yes, thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Right, bye now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.